Hello, MAT 133. This is your instructor Ryan, and I'm going to be reviewing the Milestone 2 guidelines and rubric for the Week 4 discussion post. Now, it's a discussion post, which means it's due on Thursday to give your peers an opportunity to respond, and for you to respond to two peers as well to give feedback. But it's also really a rough draft of the final project. So this is the second rough draft, and I'm going to go through this rubric here, which is posted in multiple places throughout the course, including the Week 4 announcement. So the final project for this course is the creation of a research study report. Using your work from Milestone 1, you will now add a draft of the second section of your report, and there's this extra help resource you could use in addition to everything that I posted. So really what's happening on this Milestone 2 post is you're going to make revisions of the introduction that you wrote in Milestone 1. And I gave you feedback in a rubric that you need to make sure you can access to see the feedback I gave you. So you're going to make those revisions, and in addition to that, you're going to be writing this analysis section. Okay, so this is just a summary of 3 sections of the research paper that you chose. So you're summarizing the research methods, the outcomes, and conclusions. So I'm going to go through these 3 critical elements, these three sections of your analysis. So the first section, research methods, analyze the research methods of the study. In other words, how did the researchers test their hypotheses related to the research questions? What, if any, assumptions did the researchers make in order to conduct their research? So really what I'm looking for here is how do they analyze the data? Now, sometimes people will write about how data was collected, and I'm okay with that, but how was it analyzed? So what I'm going to use as an example here is this article, does early life misfortune increase the likelihood of psychotropic medication use in later life? So you'll see here I'm on page 9. If you download it as a PDF, it comes up as page 9 or 566, and I'm on the statistical analysis section of the paper. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is look for just some sentences that describe how the data was analyzed. So you will read through this if you're doing this article, but the main things that pop out to me are what's written here. First, we estimated a series of logistic regressions to assess the relationships between childhood misfortune and adult psychotropic drug use at baseline. To replicate the original childhood misfortune psychotropic medication study, the first models examined the cumulative effect of childhood misfortune and used ACM as a key predictor. Okay, so I'm not going to just keep reading this here, but what you'll see is that there were 4 models. Okay, and in the second model, all of the independent variables were used, and in models 3 and 4, they looked at each variable separately to see whether certain types of misfortune are associated with psychotropic medication, because they looked at different domains and different variables of misfortune, and so they're looking at those individually in models 3 and 4. So this would be a good thing to write in your analysis section. It's saying, how was the data analyzed? Now, the goal isn't for you to really understand every single word that's written there. The goal is for you to be able to read this and kind of get a gist of what's happening. And as long as you can summarize that, that's okay. All right. And you want to look for the big picture stuff. All right. So especially in your outcomes and conclusions. So for outcomes, we are going to examine the outcomes of those tests. What were the major findings? Did they reject or fail to reject the hypotheses, and why? Now, sometimes this isn't, we're not doing hypothesis testing in all of these studies, so that's just an example. You might not see those words reject or fail to reject, and that's okay. And then also with statistically significant, you won't always see those words depending on which study you're looking at, okay? So then we have the conclusion section. It says, evaluate the conclusions drawn by the researchers Do you think the conclusions are valid based on the data and hypothesis test results? Is there sufficient data to support the research's generalizations? Why or why not? Now, these two sections are very closely related. Outcomes and conclusions, you could see that as being the same term. Outcomes, what I'm looking for is what are the big picture findings. If you could describe the outcomes in a couple sentences, what were they, instead of getting into all the little nitty-gritty details. And the conclusions, what I'm looking for is kind of the data to back it up, okay? Because this question here, are the conclusions valid based on the data? If you provide some data, that's fine. But I do kind of want you to answer this question because that is in the rubric as well. Is there sufficient data to support the researcher's generalization? So is the data supporting those big picture outcomes that you wrote about in the outcome section? So for example, in the same study, you can go down, you'll see the word results, right? So we'll see here, Model 1 reveals a relationship between ACM and psychotropic medication without adjusting for any covariance. So without adjusting for any other demographics or other variables. It says ACM increases the likelihood of psychotropic medication use. And it says for each additional child in misfortune, the odds of taking psychotropic medication increase by about 44%. So there's a big picture outcome right there. All right, that's Model 1. Now you'll see for Model 2, it's written somewhere on this page, right here. When adjusting for other variables, it increased by 27%. And then you'll see here in Model 3 and then Model 4. Now the goal, again, is to summarize these big picture results, not to get too far into the nitty-gritty, and then give the p-values or give some of the data that is given right here. So that would be outcomes and conclusions as long as you give the data, and you're going to write, is this enough data to support the results, the generalizations, okay? So that's basically it for this. You have, I would say, split these up into 3 paragraphs: research methods, outcomes, conclusions. I wouldn't mind if you put outcomes and conclusions together because they're very closely intertwined. And make sure you submit by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. of your local time zone. Make sure you respond to 2 peers with some feedback. And remember that it should be double space in APA format, including the cover page, the reference page, and in-text citations. And make sure it doesn't say on this rubric, please do it, attach it as a Word document, because you will be attaching a Word document for your final project, and I just want to check that it's all formatted correctly before you submit that final project. This is the rubric right here. It's a lot like last week. You just have these 3 additional sections on top of the introduction. So what you're submitting is 1 paper that is now 2 to 3 pages in length because you have your introduction and analysis. Please feel free to post in the extra help discussion threads, and I will be happy to answer. Hope you guys have a good week. Bye.